already much better. A lot of good examples, but presented in such a way that the clarity of the contribution is not obvious. So you have a good story and contribution, but you will need to tell it in a convincing way. So this is not anymore rejection, it's a risky revision. Okay? So what to do, some suggestions. Okay, this is the paper that's published. So after going through 5 cycles, so we begin with heirlooms, boom, and how they're related to family meanings. Alternatively, we consider iterative and interactive relation between change and continuity. This is the part we're problematizing the literature. So this is a different tactic than the other papers. We're directly problematizing the literature. I mean, if you know anything about sociology, you should know, we should know as a community of researchers that, you know, change and continuity are not totally different things. But our literature has not dealt with this at all. So that's how we begin. We begin in bring becoming. We bring, okay, the context comes on the second page. Okay, so there's nothing about the context until the second page. Then the context comes, and look how we present the context. Interviews, archival, textual, visual documents. Turkey research site is an emergent economy facing rapid changes. Serves our theoretical perspective on continuity and change. So this is a rationalization of the context. Of course we're doing this study in Turkey because we're Turkish. Doesn't matter. We have to find a theoretical rationale for the context for this particular paper. And it is, given its emergency and rapid changes, it is a good context for studying continuity and change. So a bit more about these rapid changes, what we mean by, I mean, saying this research, the Turkey is an emergent economy facing rapid changes, is right now, well, we still have a citation here, not fully justified. You know, what if we're just saying this? We're making this up. What if Turkey is not this? We have to justify this. We cannot make big claims. So we justify. What do we mean by this? Using lots of references. What this rapid change entails and why this has both continuity and change. Okay? And then the context is fertile ground for fresh unraveling of transformative heirloom consumption practices, in addition to the well-known curatorial preservation which exists in the literature. So here we put up our contribution up front. Why? Because we're problematizing the literature. We're showing why we're questioning it and how we're different. So the theoretical perspectives we draw from. So we draw from heterogeneous uneven time, post-colonial literature, materiality, and craft literature. So we put 3 literatures together: materiality, heterogeneous time, crafts work, do-it-yourself work. We put it together to come up with our own explanation, which is a little crazy. Skip this. I know you cannot see anything, but I'll try to sort of illustrate our thinking. So there is the most macro tension, the desirable new, the burdensome old, that exists in the context that we described when we were delineating the context, the urban, the rural. So the new is desirable, the old, especially associated with the village, is burdensome. Another macro tension, this is like broad societal imaginaries not individual-based. Progressive urban life, backward rural life. How did we get those? Some from the interviews, but not solely from the interviews. And if we got it only from the interviews, we could not claim them to be encircling at the broadest level. We looked at archival material, internet, all kinds of media material. Yes?
You also say they are public discourse?
Yes, they're public discourses. Taste for the authentic old and distinctive old. Now, this is the positive side of the old. Remember when I was talking about the context, I said in the Turkish imaginary, the old is both bad and good. So this is the bad old and rural, the good old, authentic and distinctive. Domestic craft work ideals. Okay, just like everywhere. Okay, these are specific to Turkey. These three. This is not specific to Turkey. Around this time, there's a lot of do-it-yourself, craft work, people engaging in craft work, pretty much everywhere in the world in urban areas. So this also exists in Turkey. This is the global element. These are the local elements. Broadest level, structuring the way people think and feel about special objects with meaning, families, objects. Now we're getting more micro. Consumers' life trajectory. So, you know, were they divorced? How did the parent die? Do they have children or not, etc.? What's happening in their lives? Practices of self-adorning. Some heirlooms are jewelry, watch, etc. So related to adorning the self. Some of them are homemaking, furniture, paintings, etc. So these are more closely related to determining what items can be heirlooms. And then here, you know, yesterday we were talking about it's so difficult to show movement. We had the same difficulty. How are we going to show movement? Actually, I have this, see it a little bit more, market forces and the competent crafts person, consumer, your competent consumer, work together dialogically to engage with particular heirlooms. And these are the movements and interactions and interplays. So nothing is linear. Let me go back to the big picture. Nothing is linear here. There's no linearity. That's why this thing was so difficult to draw. And these specify all the things in the paper. Sociocultural connotations, whether they're weak or strong, positive or negative. Family meanings, strong or weak, so more macro, group level, self level, self-contamination. People want to contaminate something with their own imprint, in addition to the families. Different kinds of heirlooms, essences, the three different types we found. And this is how we show whether the heirloom is active, passive, whether it's materially transformed or compositionally transformed. The reviewers wanted this. We didn't have a drawing in the beginning. The reviewers said this is, you know, lots of things are happening. This is a problem with papers are right. Lots of things are happening. So, you know, give us a roadmap to read this paper. Okay. So to wrap up, what are the challenges we faced? You need to tell a story to a particular audience. And this is not an easy task because you think of the audience as if yourself or your advisor or your friend. That's not the case. They're farther away. They don't know your context. You don't know them that well. You've got to provide a mental shift in the audience. You know, you've got to write in a way, I mean, use the teaching skills, okay? How do you capture the students, right? We have some tricks we do to capture the student's mind. Same applies writing a paper. You need to, when the reader starts reading your paper, they've got to immediately have a mental shift to walk into your context. Make the familiar strange, and the strange familiar. So we take Star Trek, which is very familiar, make it strange, and we take veiling, something very strange, make it very familiar, talking about jeans and tattoos. Communicating with a North American audience, communicating with an audience is difficult to start with. Communicating with a North American audience is doubly difficult because they're the center and we're not. And as the dominant center, they don't have to spend the effort. They're used to them being the center and everything in their universe being universal and everything else being tiny little. And this requires the translation becomes doubly difficult. Here, this is something I shared with some of you, but I'd like to repeat the anecdote because I think it's an important story. Two of my colleagues, Olga Kreves and Özlem Sandıkçı, published a paper in Journal of Marketing on middle class, emergent new middle classes, 2014, I believe. And I'm not an author, I was not part of that research project, but they sent it to Journal of Marketing and they got a rejection, desk rejection. There's a difference between desk rejection where your paper is not even sent to the reviewers. The editor feels it so bad that it's not worth taking the reviewer's time, okay? So they got a rejection letter, tiny paragraph saying, basically, who cares about Turkey, a town in Turkey, what's happening in Turkey? It's a specific, too specific of study. And they came to me, their junior, what are we going to do now? I said, we're going to write a response back. But it's a desk rejection. Who cares? We're going to write a response back. So we wrote together a 2-page letter to the editor telling him that Madison, Wisconsin is also a specific area. New York City is also a specific area. How can they accept papers from any US city if he's going to talk about specificity? And, we started nicely and then we started putting him on a guilt trip in terms of using epistemology, ontology. How can he be so narrow-minded without saying this, using, big words? But he wrote back the next day an apologetic letter, apologizing 100 times and sending it out to reviewers, and the paper is published. So don't shy away, keep on fighting. And you've got to be polite, you've got to be nice but convincing, you've got to be strong. Writing that 2-page letter did not take 15 minutes, okay? It took a long time. We wrote it, rewrote it, sat on it, rewrote it, then we sent it. I know that English is a problem for all of us. I know that you don't feel comfortable writing in English or even talking in English, but you've got to. If you want to publish internationally, you've got to. First thing perhaps to do is to improve your fluency in English. You've got to think in English because translations just don't work. Use an English language editor. JCR and some other journals have this, and by the way, even native speakers do. Daniel Miller, we were talking about Daniel Miller, except for his 1987 book, except for his first book, he's never done a book without an editor. He's British, born and raised in London, okay, Oxford graduate. He uses an editor writing each and every book. So it's not, it's not a...
Editor, you mean, sorry, somebody...
For his language, to edit his language, yes. To make it more accessible, to make it clearer, to provide the linkages, because we get lost in our own description and explanation, and it's in our head, so we don't see it as the audience would.
Can I ask
Sure.
a question? Just in that case, for example, that you submitted 5 versions,
Would you use the editors on the first version or the last one? The English.
Each and every one. Each and every one. Anything else? While I'm getting some water for myself.
Just curiosity.
Yeah.
Was your draw, I mean the crazy figure you present as accepted by the first version? Or
No. Fifth version.
Okay.
Fifth version. She says. Fifth version. I mean, basically, they said conditional acceptance, but it's difficult to follow your arguments. Can you give us a, it would be nice. In a conditional acceptance, they don't say do this. They say it would really help the leader if you provide a roadmap. And then, you know what that means. You better do it.
I just had a curiosity. You were saying that your students, PhD students, had to submit one paper to get
To have one paper accepted.
accepted,
Accepted.
not published,
Not published, accepted.
for publishing.
Yes.
And how long is the PhD in Turkey?
4 years, but my students, they take 6-7 years. But I mean, I also make them take anthropology, sociology, this and that.
Not the mystery solved.
Okay.
Calculations.
She told us part of the truth.
Yes. No, I mean, yeah. Am I all red? A little bit, not? No? Am I all red, my friend? No? Anyways, so I think we talked about all of this, and this is important for a lot of us, fresh scholars, junior scholars especially. We want to, we've spent so much time in the field, we want to put everything on paper. No, you don't need to. And this is something I keep hearing all the time. A paper needs to make 1 point, not lots of points. No, if you were publishing in France, this would not be the case. If France were the center of academia, this would not be the case. But North America is the center of academia, not France. And they want, clear 1 point. Writing is very different in Europe versus in the US. And if you've done observations as well as interviews, use the observations in writing the paper. I get so many papers that say, I looked at the archives, I did observations, I did interviews, and what they present in the findings is only interviews. Then why did you do the rest? Either kick it out, don't say you've done it, or use it. And better to use it, of course. So I suppose with what I've shown you, I convinced you that the beginning of the paper is very important. You need to provoke and excite the reader and make them think that they want to read your paper. And ending the paper is also extremely important. They should leave with a satisfaction of having learned something new that they did not know beforehand. You can use the context first, later, doesn't matter whether you start with observations or not, but just use it. I asked the COPPEAD colleagues to read a paper by a book chapter by Price, Arnaud, and Moiso. We'd be happy to share it with everybody if you want to. They talk about the importance of the context for anybody, not just Brazilians or Turks, but for Americans as well, how to use the context to theorize. I think it's a useful little article. So, in closing, we should reflect about our periphery position and use our periphery position strategically to speak to the center. It is clearly possible. Yes, it may take a long time, but it is possible to generalize, extrapolate from specific locations. It's possible to contextualize and specify without essentializing. I hope, I was able to show how we were able to do this without essentializing. So think in terms of similarities, not only differences, etc. Now, we produce cultural products, papers, books. We're also cultural products ourselves. To be able to reflexively and consciously speak to the center, I had to realize how I was produced culturally and how a North American colleague was produced culturally in order to establish a dialogue and in order to provide translations. So it's important to reflect on not just our biases and stuff, but how was I produced and how is my audience produced? It's easy to imprison ourselves into Brazilian reality, Brazilian context, Brazilian violence, I'm just spitting out the words that are on the top of my mind. And to self-orientalize, to sort of limit ourselves in terms of what our impact can be, self-peripheralize ourselves. So pushing those borders out takes a bit more effort. Sometimes, the center likes to appropriate us. Like some of my colleagues in political sciences, a lot of people wrote about Islam, have been writing about Islam, fell into that trap, writing to the center in words that the center would like to hear, to reifying their stereotypes of the periphery. So try to avoid that. Try to avoid being a reification agent of the stereotypes and the ideologies of the center. Because it's easy to do, because it's a quick way to get published. That's where our integrity and morality comes into play. And please go beyond applying X model or Y model to your data. That will not get you anywhere. We've got to be better than the best. I mean, sometimes you might think, how did this paper get published? It's white American male, okay? It's easy to get published if you're in the center. We have a harder struggle. We need to increase our awareness because we're not in the loop. There's this term Americans use, being in the loop. The Americans are in the loop by the nature of their geography and their universities. So we've got to make an effort to be in the loop. And here are some ways to be in the loop. I'm not going to go through this, this is something, again, I shared with a lot of you. So I try to deal with all of this by back and forth thinking with respect to all the dimensions you can think about. Turkey is an oral culture. I don't know about Brazil. We're much more of an oral culture than a written culture. So I find writing extremely difficult. And the only way I can deal with it is to use writing as a way to clarify my own analysis to myself. So thinking through writing is something that I try to do. And making a point, making an argument. Reading strategically for writing. I do the deepest reading when I'm writing something. So if I read, Foucault for fun, I don't really understand Foucault that much. If I read Foucault for a paper I'm writing, then I really understand Foucault. So read selectively related to what you're writing, but also very, very broadly. And this is an individual choice. You don't have to be in the international arena, but make it your choice. Which community of researchers do you want to be in? And whether you write only for a Brazilian audience or an American audience, don't self-orientalize and do your best work for the Brazilian audience as well. Even though lesser work will also get published. Self-respect. Respect yourselves. You can do it. If I did it, anybody can do it. Yes, it takes time. It takes time. That's for sure. So, final word. We have an advantage. I mean, America, okay, with Trump, it's not as boring as it used to be. But North America is a rather boring place compared to Turkey or Brazil. Again, Trump changed a whole bunch of things. With Trump, it's an exciting place. But we do have interesting, important problems and puzzles and amazing contexts. So pick one that either excites you, that you're passionate about, that you are afraid of, that you're threatened by, that you're irritated by, that you're scared by, that it's something meaningful for you, something that will get the emotions flowing. Emotionality and materiality go together. And think of your research not as a single paper, and then I'll work on, now I'm working on, I don't know, laptops. In my next project, I'm going to be working on clothes. No, think about issues like materiality. And think about, next 4 or 5 projects for the next 5, 6 years that you're going to do on materiality. Perhaps with laptops and this, but in terms of what's the program you're going to be developing. Because then you're going to be able to say, the world will be able to say, Eduardo, he's done a lot of contribution to materiality. He will be known for his contributions for materiality. So the suggestion is to work on projects that are somehow theoretically connected to each other for the long term. Okay, not for the project you're working on right now necessarily, but as a long-term strategy. Then you have a higher probability of having voice in the international arena. So, bold conjectures, bold steps, bold attitude to have a voice in the international community, if that's what you choose to do. Thank you so much. Thank you.